President of the Citizens Club of Springfield, Illinois. I'm glad to have everybody here. It's great, big attendance this morning. If you didn't see the sign, I want to thank the coffee sponsor this morning, Carol Sutton, the treasurer of our club. Thank you, Carol. Carol is also back at the table. If you've not paid your dues for 23-24, we'd love to have you join us. Our new year begins July 1st. Those dues are $30. We've got a wonderful program this morning. I must admit, one of our guests has not joined us yet. We hope he's able to make it. This morning, we're going to be having a panel discussion on the changing media environment, how it impacts us, and how we actually get news of what's happening locally, what's happening here in the state of Illinois. Our panel host is Randy Eccles, General Manager of the NPR Illinois, and the panelists include Fletcher Farrar, who is the editor and owner of the Illinois Times and the Springfield Business Journal, Jason Pisha, who is the director of UIS Public Affairs Reporting Program, and if he's able to join us, Michael Truitt, who is the director of news for WICS Channel 20. And of course, when we have time, and I hope we will, I hope we'll have time for questions and answers from the audience so we can ask important things in terms of how does that impact me and what are my alternatives in terms of finding resources. With that, please join me in welcoming all three of our guests now until Michael hopefully joins us, and I will turn it over to Randy.
Thank you, John. We had a preparation meeting a couple weeks ago for this, and we had no problem talking about issues that are existing in local news and media, and so really, to get started, I'd like to do a nostalgia and reality check, and just how were things? You know, what is that sort of valued of, I remember how it was, and what's the reality now for each of us? Fletcher, let's start with you. How are things right now for you in print and alt weekly and business journalism, and how is that different from 5-10 years ago? Small question.
Things are going well now. We're post-pandemic by quite a ways, and we're recovering well, and we get a Illinois Times out once a week and Business Journal once a month, and it's all good. I started at Illinois Times 46 years ago. I was editor of my high school newspaper, and it seems like I've been doing the same thing ever since. But the paper's 48 years old. I didn't get there until 2 years later. But we've never missed a week in all that time. And so that's what we do. It changes. There's good times, you know, good economic times. There's bad, and what we do is just take what comes and weather the storm and keep publishing.
Do you feel like the ability to do local news has changed at all for you?
Not really. We work at attracting good journalists and experienced journalists, but also inexperienced journalists. We have been a training ground in the past. We always participate in the public affairs reporting intern program, and we find good people. We feel like God sends us good people, and we work with who is sent. So the ability to do journalism is just kind of knowing what journalism is and supporting the people that do it well.
Jason, your situation's a little different. Right now, you're very involved in education of journalists with the Public Affairs Reporting Program at UIS, but also you graduated from that program, and prior to that, you were with the State Journal-Register, who was invited to be here today but couldn't make it, and somebody mentioned that's because they're thousands of miles away. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. They were offered to be here. Anyway, Jason, the same nostalgia reality question, what was the idea of what used to be and how is it right now?
Yeah, I come at it, like Randy said, from two different points of view. Before coming on at UIS in 2019, I was a reporter and an editor at the State Journal-Register for 21 years. So I remember those early days at the State Journal-Register when there were lots of reporters and lots of journalists in the newsroom. We were able to have pretty late deadlines, and our reporters were able to get out to a lot of the different units of government that were covering things around Springfield. You felt like you had a good handle on what was going on around town. Fast forward to my final years at the State Journal-Register in 2019, the newsroom had been cut significantly. We had to make choices on, we only have, small amount of people to cover a large amount of things, so we had to pick our shots on what's most important. And as a result, we missed a lot of things, and it's a little bit concerning. You don't know what you don't know. So, how much are we missing out there on a daily basis? And then from the educational standpoint, I think it's harder these days to encourage students to get into journalism, particularly political journalism. We just had a president who spent 4 years vilifying the media at every turn. And, a lot of his ire was directed toward national media, but, that transferred on definitely to local and state reporters as well, from people who didn't, understand that there's a difference there in what we cover and what we talk about. So as a result, it's been, more challenging to fill seats in my program, which is a 10-month master's degree program that focuses on political journalism. The highlight of the program is we put the students in a 6-month news internship at the Capitol, working in the state Capitol press room alongside the professional reporters there. They're getting a good taste of how the craziness this week. A lot of them were working till after midnight this morning as the Senate passed the budget, and they'll be working tonight as well as the House tries to slam it through before they go home for the summer. So, I have, it's a limited number of applicants each year. We had a pretty small class this year, and if we look back to nostalgia time 20 years ago, the 2002, 2005 range, we'd have upwards of 60 applicants, and we let in more than 20 people to the program. This year, those numbers are, 30% of what they were. So, like I said, those are the realities I'm dealing with.
Right, and then in public radio and radio in general, similarly, we are seeing the digital disruption is really been the change from 5-10 years ago. There's so much more competition out there. Anybody can do a podcast, and you've got social media out there competing with us too. So, it's been a real challenge in that sense. The business model has changed, just like Fletcher was saying. Whether the economy's up or down has some impact on the resources we have to be able to do the news we want. But probably the biggest thing that's impacting us right now is what Jason's talking about, and that is attracting people to be journalists. Fletcher's been able to take a lot of really good veteran journalists, retired journalists sometimes, and put them back into action. And what we're finding is the pipeline of people interested in doing this work is getting smaller and smaller. I think some of that's because people can jump up and do it themselves, but then they're missing the editorial credibility that comes from somebody else reviewing their work sometimes. So You know, public media is still very healthy. Right now we're seeing an ad market that's going down, so you see a lot of media making cuts. NPR, the national NPR, has made cuts recently, I think a 10% across the board cut, but we're still at the national level delivering lots of information, and then each local station is independent in doing what they can. So there's been a lot of conversation. I mean, the title of this segment is about local news and what's happened to it. And some of that, I think, comes from just looking at something like your local paper and what's happened there. What are we losing? What is it that's not working with local right now? Jason, do you want to take a first stab?
Sure. Like I said, the numbers just aren't there in terms of reporters. You know, there's some research by Pew. It's a little bit old, but, you know, between 2008 and 2020, this was even before the pandemic was able to affect anything, the number of news reporters has decreased by 26% over that time. And that's counting all forms of media. If you just look at newspaper reporters, that decreases up to 55 or 56% compared to what it was in 2008 to 2020. So it's just a lack of people to cover things. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, editors need to just be making decisions on, you know, what are we going to cover today and what do we have to miss today. And like I said, the most concerning thing is we don't know what we're missing because we're not out there looking for it. And, you know, I think there's a lot of research out there on the concept of news deserts. You've heard the concept of a food desert, you know, a community that doesn't have a high quality grocery store where people can get fresh produce and fresh meat and fresh food. There's also a news desert where there's a community that there isn't a high quality media source there to keep the people informed about what's going on in their communities. There's some research out of Northwestern University that keeps track of this. There are about 3,000 counties in the United States. About 200 of those counties have no newspaper at all covering anything going on in the local government. About half of those counties have just one newspaper, and it's usually a weekly. No offense, but weeklies don't cover news as robustly as the daily newspaper does. And again, many of those, you know, newspapers in that count as well can be considered, you know, another phenomenon in this, which is a ghost newspaper or a zombie newspaper, which is a newspaper where there is very little or no local staff on the newspaper. The residents of that community get a newspaper on their doorstep every morning or a few mornings a week, but there's no local news in it because there is no local reporters. So they're just getting a newspaper filled with national news, international news, and then maybe news from the, you know, the biggest city near them. So that's not serving people either. So like I said, a lot of holes in the coverage and holes in what people are paying attention to. And, you know, those numbers are only getting worse. And we'll probably talk about, hopefully, solutions to all this later. But I think it's time to dig into some real solutions on how we can handle this. And we can talk about that later.
Jason's also on the governor's local journalism task force, and they've only met once so far, but there's conversation going about how the state could potentially address this, and hopefully we'll see some results come out of that. But turning back to Fletcher, and the question is, are we losing local? That perception is that things are getting bad, and what do you see that isn't working?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Jason said, and things in the world are getting bad, which gives journalists a chance and makes them important. We started out as an alternative weekly newspaper, and still our national association is Association of Alternative News Media, but we were alternative to the daily. We were alternative to bad journalism. We were, you know, we were cool and they were not. But right now we're still an alternative, but an alternative to lies, misinformation. I have a friend who's working on a project to oppose the revisionists, the Black history revisionists, and it's she calls it a counter-narrative project, but now counter-narrative is telling the truth. That's kind of what we always thought we were doing when we were an alternative, was we were doing it different and better and more truthful and more bold. I think that spirit is still alive in anybody that wants to be a journalist. So a positive way of looking at it is that there's more reason now than ever to be a journalist. One reason there's not more journalists is there's not more jobs. And if we can figure out how to hire people, there's people out there that are wanting to tell the truth. Our intern this year is Don Howard. He's out here.
Hi, Don.
We think of interns as young college people. Don's been around, seen the world. He's a lawyer. It's hard to train a lawyer to be a journalist, but we're working on it. There are people out here who want to do this work. It's just making it possible for them to learn it and to do it, and a place for them to work.
Yeah, I think when it comes to local, what we're seeing right now is that the IT, Fletcher's paper, and probably Channel 20 are doing more daily or at least weekly reporting on what's going on locally than the SJR. And, we are going through a process where we're trying to fill some positions and having trouble with that, so that's reduced our capacity. The Great Resignation, I think, has almost affected every organization and business I've talked to, and journalism is no exception. It's getting very difficult to staff and cover local news, so that's one of the areas where it's broken. The other area where it's broken is the business model. And, as digital has disrupted things, it's made it very difficult for classifieds, display ads, and things that used to fund so much of the journalism to continue to do so. And we're trying to figure that out. One of the business models that seems to have some potential and is already proven is public media. Nonprofit journalism. And you're seeing organizations like CNI and others develop, CNI is Capital News Illinois, which are developing nonprofit journalism and sharing it with the community and helping us be more educated. But the other piece that's missing when we don't have local journalism that's really strong is accountability. And when we can only cover maybe the school board or the city board, but as Jason mentioned, the deserts that are out there, we're not covering Rochester or Chatham or Petersburg. Stuff happens there that nobody is going to hold them accountable for because it doesn't get out. Maybe it gets in social media, but then you're not sure exactly what angle you're getting on the story. Jason, what do we do to improve accountability?
Yeah, this is a great time to be a unscrupulous public official. Don't get any ideas for those of you who are public officials. We'll find out eventually. But yeah, I think one of the effects of not keeping track of what your local officials are doing is, research has shown areas that have poor or little to local news coverage. There's more political polarization. In the absence of learning about what's going on with snow plowing in your community or road repairs or the school board or, things that, Democrats and Republicans can sort of find some common ground on that, all this stuff needs to be good so we have a good place to live. In the absence of that news, they turn to the national sources. So they're watching CNN and Fox News, where all they do all day long is, complain about the other party of how horrible they are. And that turns into this ultra red and ultra blue environment that we live in now, where all we can do is complain about everything all of the time. So, that's part of it as well. Sorry, repeat your question again.
Just accountability, and how do we continue to hold, with less local journalism, how do we make sure our democracy functions?
Yeah, like I said, every day news editors are, making important decisions about what to cover. They have to miss some things. You mentioned nonprofit is a solution, and I'm wondering if the CNI model, which if you don't know, is CNI, Capital News Illinois, is supported by the McCormick Foundation and the Illinois Press Foundation. They have an office at the Capitol with 4, 5, 6 reporters who just cover what goes on at the State House every single day and around the state with state government. And they distributed those stories for free to newspapers and radio station websites throughout the state. They're getting into a broadcast operation as well. So pretty soon you'll be seeing, CNI-produced content, perhaps on your local radio station and TV station. The business model is different. Instead of relying on sort of capitalism and the whims of what the economy is, CNI gets its money from, large benefactors who believe in the importance of knowing what your government's doing. So they invest into that. There's a little less pressure to, worry about making money. But you still need to make money, because eventually the large benefactors are going to, want to phase themselves out and, make it a self-sufficient operation. So that's sort of where CNI is right now. They've hired a full-time, not a full-time, but a fundraiser person to sort of, find ways to keep the money flowing. And I'm wondering if that model can't be replicated on the local level as well. You can find the Institute for Nonprofit News. If you go to their website, you'll see there's a blueprint on there for how you can turn a for-profit media organization into a nonprofit one. It's not always easy, but you need a board of directors, you need some solid money, you need to be in a community that has a solid money source that's willing to invest in this for the good of the community and for the good of democracy. Some little towns might not have that wherewithal, but I think that's a sort of a path to the future.
And as you mentioned, the challenge with the nonprofit model is that the need never goes away. You've got to be able to either find replacement funders or keep funders engaged on a regular basis. And if there's demand like there is right now for more coverage, you need to figure out how to increase that funding. And that's a challenge, I think. So there are several for-profits that have converted to nonprofit. The biggest nearby is probably the Sun-Times, which WBEZ, the public radio station in Chicago, now operates as a nonprofit. And I think it's to be seen yet whether that will work out. So that's a challenge too. Bud, what do you think as you see some of these go nonprofit, being a for-profit entity, does that hold a solution for you in the future if needed?
We go nonprofit about half the time. But the good years make up for the... We enjoy being funded by advertising. I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned, but it spreads the liability. So if you lose a grant, you've lost a lot. But if you lose an advertiser, you can probably get them back and somebody else will join. So it's a good model. It started a long time ago, but we appreciate it. But at the same time, we also benefit from grant-funded organizations like Capital News Illinois. That's been a tremendous help to us in supplementing our news coverage that we can pay for. And ProPublica, other organizations have helped us a lot. And I think partnering with nonprofits is a good way for us to go. But it's not a grand solution for everybody. I mean, you still got to be beholden to grant organizations, and a lot of them are going for big operations. I've heard from the MacArthur Foundation that they hope to eventually give grants to a statewide news organization that will filter down to us eventually. Well, you know, if we're still around by then, well, we'll profit from that. But I think if somebody wants to run a news operation in a small town, they've got to look beyond grants.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about what's not working. Anything come to your mind that is working locally? Any good examples, Jason, of solutions? This is exciting, yeah. I think we talked about CNI. I do think that's one. I think what you're seeing in CNI is sort of the end of competitive journalism, where we're all trying to beat each other to the story, and there's not enough room for that anymore. And what we need to do is collaborate and make sure that instead of sending 6 reporters from 6 media organizations to the board meeting, we send 2 to that, and then we send 2 to something else and 2 to something else, and then share that on our platform, whatever it may be, whether it's radio, TV, print, digital. That's what CNI, I think their form is basically is here. We're going to go out and gather this news, and then the media groups get to specialize in how to best reach the audience and get it to you to listen to. So I hope that continues to develop. I think it's going to be important. We do that a lot with public media within the state. We share with all the other radio stations. You'll hear a lot of WBEZ reporting on the air if something's going on downstate. You'll hear WSIU. You'll hear our stuff on other stations around the state. And we've worked with the Illinois Times before, and each other have shared news back and forth. I think that's going to grow as one of the ways to address this. But any thoughts on how we can, any good things happening in local journalism?
Well, I agree with you. Collaboration is an issue. Also, freelancers have been my salvation. We find good writers in the community and encourage them to do good work. So, and that's always been an opportunity for good journalism. It's a small thing, but you put together a bunch of small things like an internship, like hiring the people that you can, by finding good people that want to work for not very much, and it's a solution to journalism. You just find it where you can, and collaboration is a good place to find it.
You mentioned not getting paid very much, and I think that is one of the problems we see, is that the business model doesn't allow us to be competitive, and a lot of good journalists end up taking state jobs as public relations people. And it's not that media, at least at the local level, none of us are making a ton of money. It's just that that's what we have to pay. One of the things that they're talking about lately with news is how there's news fatigue and news burnout. And one of the things I've heard as a recommendation to deal with that is to make sure when we're doing a story, when we're reporting, is that we offer hope or some sort of solution or some action that people can take. With that, what could each of these folks here do? What can we do to help with local journalism? Is there any action we can take? Jason?
Yeah, you mentioned solutions journalism, which is sort of a trend that's attempting to work its way into local newsrooms, where we just don't look at the car wreck that happened. We try to figure out why the car wreck happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. But yeah, that's the things that the general public can do is, I know it's hard, but support your local media. If you have any ire toward what's happening at the local newspaper, direct that ire toward the owners, Gannett Corporation. They're the ones making the purse strings decisions on how many reporters they should have and how that should work out. The local journalists are really working their rear ends off, trying to cover the community. So be nice to them. Maybe when you do call them, maybe call them to say nice things once in a while as opposed to just calling them with complaints. But encourage them, give them tips on things that they can cover or things that they should pay attention to or things that you're seeing out in the world. You know, before, you know, we'd count our reporters to be the eyes and ears of the community. There's are not enough eyes and ears out there anymore. So that's up to you. If you see things going on, you know, call your local journalist to let them know about it. They might not be able to get to a story on it right away just because they have a million other things they need to be doing, but at least get that in their ear to start that process.
Bud, what can we do?
Tell us what's going on. I think that sometimes people think, well, journalists should know what's going on. Well, nobody tells us anything unless it's you. So that's one thing. You know, in a state government town, not only does state government steal away our best journalists, they put a muzzle on them. At least they think they're muzzled, so that a lot of people that work for state government can't talk, or at least can't talk publicly. And if we find somebody that's willing to put their name out and say this is what's happening and this is, you know, who's doing what, well, that's what journalists need. Citizens Club is a good place that I've always found good stories of, not only during the coffee time, but also during. Bob Gray always had an agenda, and so you listen carefully, you find out what's what and where things are going, and it's a good place for stories, and I hope that it will continue to be a good place to get stories.
Yeah, I think we've been looking at this, and capacity is going to be an issue. How we can't hire enough reporters to cover. You know, our NPR Illinois broadcast area goes over to Hannibal on Mississippi, goes to Decatur, down to Litchfield, up to Lincoln. There's a lot of towns in there, a lot of news deserts, and so we started a pilot program called Listen, and we did the first one at Southeast High School with high school students, and we're trying to identify underrepresented audience cohorts that have not been able to get their voice out and amplify it. So we went there, and a variety of students were collected by the school to talk to us. Just yesterday we aired some of the excerpts from it. So one, it gets us there where we can hear what's going on in different audience cohorts. So like in the future, we hope to go to smaller towns around. Let's go to Pana and hear what's happening in Pana, or let's go to an assisted living community and hear what life is like there. But the key to this for us is what we're hoping to be able to do is provide training to anybody who's interested after that to continue to report out of that audience area, so that, you know, there could be a high school student, and one of the students at Southeast did a report on the event and filed that with us, and then we can share it through our website and on air. So the hope is that we may not be able to purchase capacity or pay for reporters to join us, but maybe we can get some people in the community who want to understand what good journalism is, how to make credible journalism that is taken a look at by an editor and then shared with the community, so we can hear more of what's going on. But it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and we're just starting. So there are a lot of different factors we've talked about how local media is impacted. One of them seems to have been media consolidation. Gannett was mentioned. What we've seen with the newspaper industry is, besides digital disruption, where they've lost a lot of their income streams and their audience, we've also seen big companies buy up all the papers, and as they do that, it seems like they keep making cuts. And is that because they're just not making enough money, or is it because they're trying to get more profit to their stockholders? Jason, you were sort of around some of that. What's your perspective?
Yeah, it's both. But yeah, I mean, they buy up the papers to hope that they can, you know, squeeze every last amount of money out of it that they can, and then, you know, repay their shareholders to what they need. And, you know, as a result, you see a lot of consolidation. I mentioned the ghost newspapers, where, you know, a story from, you know, something happening in Peoria is going to show up in like 7 different newspapers in a 100 to 150 mile radius around Peoria. You might see Peoria stories appear in the State Journal Register sometimes. And I know Peoria's a nice town, but we don't really care about what's happening there on a daily basis like we're hearing from the newspaper. And we all know the story about printing consolidation, where the Peoria Press is running many newspapers per night, including ours. And a year ago they started printing the Milwaukee newspaper in Peoria, Illinois. So Milwaukee has really early deadlines now, so they can get their paper to their readers on time.
You can't get the sports scores the next day a lot of times. Right?
And I know that's frustrating to a lot of people. I'll go on a little tangent, maybe a rant, but I know people get upset that the Cubs score isn't in the paper because the game ended at 9 o'clock. But there's other ways to get that, and to me, a daily newspaper for a Cubs score doesn't make the top 25 ways I get the Cubs score on a nightly basis. I'm getting off track, but I think
lack of local decision making.
Yeah, especially here, we talk about the situation that local newspapers in now, where the editor is on a leave, and that those duties are being covered by an editor in Florida. Not the most ideal situation. It's not the norm, and I don't think it's going to continue that way either. I think it'll get back to normal soon. But for what it's worth, I was talking to some reporters at the Journal Register recently, and they said, well, it's not ideal that the editor is thousands of miles away. The editor is engaged, cares about what's happening in the community, is coming up with ideas on how to cover things. So it's not all as doom and gloom as we might try to make it out in our minds, but also not an ideal situation.
So, but local ownership, local decision-making makes a big difference, I think, for the IT. You're vested, and people know how to find you here at the Citizens Club or elsewhere in town, to ask things. What do you see as people lose local ownership and decision-making? How is that affecting things?
Well, I think it makes a big difference where the editor lives. But also the same phenomenon that has gone on with daily papers has affected weekly papers. I told you about our alternative news media organization. A lot of those papers have been bought up and then have gone down, partly because of the economy, but partly because of lack of local ownership. A friend of mine ran the Seattle Weekly, and he sold his paper 15 years ago, and it no longer exists. The Chicago Reader was a big influence on me when I was starting, and it was sold, and it's just a tiny shadow of what it used to be. So luckily, in a small town like Springfield, nobody has swooped in and tried to steal our paper away. No hedge funds have tried to take it away. So that has helped our longevity. But at the same time, there's money available in the economy and in this town to do good journalism. I mean, Gannett is selling its papers. Why didn't somebody buy it? There are possibilities out here for journalism that are not being exercised because the people in the town are not stepping up.
It does seem like local ownership has been the key to a large extent. The Washington Post with Jeff Bezos, it got stronger because he was able to buy it. I don't know that he's living in DC all the time, but there's a sense that he's vested in that. The same with the New York Times, same with, I think the LA Times went to a local owner. And so then people tend to be more committed to what's going on in their neighborhood. Sam Zell just passed away. He was the person who bought the Tribune years ago, and I worked for the Tribune for a while and kept up. And it's a classic case of the investment culture that comes in and looks at all the parts of a newspaper that work so well together, and they start seeing the value of each one and how it would be when they sell them. So they sell the Cubs for almost $1 billion, and now they're valued a whole lot more than that. And they sell all their TV stations to Sinclair, and then they, the papers, some of them get sold off, and some of them are having a tough time making it. The Tribune Tower gets sold, and it gets made into apartments, and now the Freedom Center, which they printed the paper in, is being made into a casino. And so where did our institution, Tribune was one for Chicago, go? That's what happens. So to some extent, we just have to look at where we are at in media now with digital and everything, and decide how do we build this capacity forward. But it's been challenging to watch consolidation happen, and it happened with radio too, where big companies came in and bought a lot of radio stations, and they're starting to struggle. Odyssey is the name for the company that bought the CBS radio network, KMOX, WBBM, and they're struggling right now, and so they're going through cuts. And again, I think when those stations, and this is my personal opinion, but when there's local ownership and local control, it used to be made fun of in radio as mom and pop operations, and like this would be so many great new resources when big corporations would come in, and it's played quite the opposite. We've lost our individualism, we've lost our direct connection to the community, as a lot of those stations just run syndication. So that being said, what do you think digitally we can do to improve local coverage? Yeah, you're teaching students every day. What are you telling them?
Obviously stick with it. Let's find different ways to tell stories. I think a lot of what plagues public affairs journalism at times is a realization that we're writing for the public, and we're not writing for ourselves, or we're not writing for the governor's office or for the House Speaker's office. I think some of that gets lost sometimes. I think when you get, especially speaking of the State House bubble, which I deal with most closely, is you get caught up in that. It's important people walking around in suits all day, and they'll feed you information, and then you get that information out. When we really want to find out, how is the bill or the budget that they're going to pass, how's it going to affect home health care workers or single mothers or college students? How's it going to affect people there on the ground at home? So I think in every assignment that I give a student is, let's think about the reader. Let's maybe not lead our story with what the governor said today, but let's lead our story with what the average person thinks about what the governor said today. I think that's a good step one. I think if we put, it's maybe just as simple as a business concept. If we put the customer first, I think some good things might start to happen.
Fletcher, any?
Digital is so dispersed, and each digital operation has an audience, but it's a small audience, and it's dispersed so that it doesn't buy. It doesn't patronize advertisers. It is tuned into what it wants to read and what it agrees with. So, one of the things that I've done is be old-fashioned and move into digital gradually. Let other people learn how to do it, and then we'll follow on eventually. But the Journal Register has gone digital, and that's part of the problem with a lot of legacy media is that they've jumped whole hog into the newest thing. And, we're going to keep print going until we get digital totally figured out. We're going gradually. We've got a website. We've got a good digital newsletter. We've got several publications that are digital, but it's easier to have a voice in Springfield, Illinois, if you've got a print publication, if you've got a building, if you've got a staff, those kind of old-fashioned things are still what gives us an audience in this small town.
Yeah, when I was at Tribune, there was a person who was assigned the task of trying to figure out how digital would replace the profitability of the print model. And it was sort of like watching the movie War Games, if you ever see it, where it runs through all the scenarios and every one of them ends badly. She could not find a way that digital was going to make money. And one of the mistakes we made early on with the sharing social media platforms, we just gave it away. We wanted you to see it. That's part of our mission. But we didn't get any compensation for it. So Google and Facebook and Apple News have gotten rich, and the media is struggling to fund all that content that they get. So that's, that probably is going to have to change somehow, but I don't know, the big tech companies are not going to be about taxing somehow that content so that they can pay for it.
There is a bill in Congress. It's the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act. They've tried it several times, but it basically allows media organizations to negotiate with places like Google and Facebook to give media organizations some sort of compensation for the content that we provide to search engines. Now, it's sort of a chicken and the egg argument that I don't think anyone's completely thought through yet. I mean, the news organizations say, well, your search engine wouldn't be worth much if, our headlines didn't show up when people search for things. Google will say, well, your websites won't get many clicks if people using Google don't find your links on our site and click on them. So it's a concept that's not been completely thought through yet. You might do some reading and find that they've done this to some extent in Australia already, where Google and Facebook are compensating local media organizations in some way. One point, Facebook threatened to pull all of its news links off of Facebook. They relented on that, of course, as it went forward. So that's one possible solution being thought about, but it is also happening in Congress. So the prospects of anything getting done are slim to slim.
Well, the other challenge I think you're seeing is that digital isn't necessarily profitable, even for bigger companies. I mean, Facebook and Google, yes. But when you start to get beyond maybe the New York Times, it becomes a challenge. And when you think of operations of that size not being able to, they'll get a little bit of digital income, but they're not in the black because of it. And that's becoming a part of that equation that Fletcher is talking about. Is we're in digital, but we're waiting for it to get sorted out the right way so that the business model makes sense. And so that continues to be a challenge for local coverage. The other is fragmentation. The great thing about social media is it's so democratic. There's no hurdle to getting in, but at the same time, that means there's infinite amount of competitors, and people start getting less and less of a common coverage every day. We may get our local news from several different places, and there may not be the commonality of understanding what's going on. Any thoughts about digital moving forward that can be improved? Jason?
Like I said, you mentioned it earlier, that I think, hindsight's 20/20, of course, but I think, news organizations made a big mistake when they started giving away all their content for free on the web back in the, mid-2000s. I'll admit I was working at the Journal-Register at that time, and it was, we had a weird setup to where, people could read like 8 or 10 stories for free before they hit a paywall. And as a web editor, it was frustrating because, you want to see your web clicks get as high as they can. But, I realize now that that's a short-sighted point of view to take, especially when there's no revenue coming in from it. I think in some ways we've, as a whole, I think media has sort of put what's the right term? The cow back in the barn, or the horses back in the barn, to sort of reclaim some of that. You're seeing, people becoming a little more accepting of paywalls when they encounter them on their local website. And, part of that, it helps that, many news organizations are only charging $3 or $4 a month to get unlimited access to the website.
We've taught people over the last 10, 15 years, you don't have to pay for news. And now we have to go back and retrench and try to figure out how to do that again.
And it's happening at a hard time when, here, pay for this news, and meanwhile, the news has all these issues that we've talked about for the last 45 minutes of, a lack of reporters, a lack of coverage. So it's hard to sell a product when it's in the current state that it's in.
We started out selling Illinois Times for $0.25 a copy, and then we had the big revelation, let's go free. And so we went free, and people said, well, it's not fun to steal it anymore. So that's a long time ago. But free is good for a print publication because we're able to sell advertising. I don't know if free digital could sell ads on a local basis. I don't see that, but free is what people want.
I think we're ready for questions, John.
We are ready for questions, and Norm Sims has a microphone he's going to bring around. I do want to open with a question. You talked about mega papers coming together, buying everyone, that part of it's capitalism, it's money. I wondered also, is it because of their intentional wanting to put their political or their potential, their views in front of their all audiences?
That wouldn't be new for the newspaper industry. Colonel McCormick was pretty excited about getting, his brand out, but I think they still want to protect the news department, the editorial, to be credible, and then the opinion page and things like that might go a little.
Yeah, I don't see that so much as a motivation for buying all these newspapers. I think they just want to make money. And if you notice, a lot of Gannett papers have sort of scaled back on their opinion content, the stuff that gets the people most mad from a political standpoint. You're not seeing as many political endorsements and opinion columns and things like that.
Do we think that's what happened with Twitter? Was it bought for a political purpose, or was it bought because it's a good business proposition?
I think we did it for Elon Musk's ego more than anything.
On the right side of the house.
Oh, okay. His ego took a hit this week, I think.
Yeah, I didn't hear anyone comment today on sort of the useful interplay of local media with local groups and organizations. Of course, I represent a not-for-profit here in Springfield, and we've utilized local media to help us actually advance our cause quite a bit. And, that sort of interplay is more of a challenge, I think, now than it has been. Is that an element that you guys see kind of shrinking and changing, and how that works and how it builds community is to have that interplay with local media? And of course, we've had a couple of stories lately that have, again, organizationally helped our organization, but I think when you look at the broad spectrum of organizations in a community and how that helps bind things together, the media certainly used to be a much larger factor at that. How can we mend that?
Well, when I look at the IT and Bud, I think that's like one of the go-to places to find out what's going on with organizations in the community. We still have capacity limitations. We can't if you see the amount of press releases and different things we get throughout the week, we can't get it all done. So there frequently is a hook or something that makes it more relevant to get out there. We added a couple years ago our Community Voices program so that we could do more of that and actually spend some time talking with people about what they're doing, organizations and individuals about what they're doing in the community. But with the SJR, I don't think you're going to see a lot of it.
Yeah, my advice, I'll turn it into a PR class for a second here, but, be persistent. And if you do run a local organization, you're trying to get some media coverage, make sure what you're presenting to us is, is compelling, is a good story, as opposed to the just general regular run-of-the-mill stuff you're doing every day. And then just stay persistent. Try to make a personal connection with a reporter or an editor if you can get one on the phone. But a reporter might be your best bet since they're here locally all the time. And just keep trying and be persistent and don't I know it's difficult, but don't show frustration if you don't get coverage for when you want coverage. I think we saw, there was the story a few weeks ago where the new mayor left the SJR out of her election night party because she was upset that the SJR didn't cover her election campaign enough. I'd respectfully say that's not the way to improve relationships with the media as you're going forward with a new administration. But I get the frustration.
Any other questions on this?
Can I answer? I'd say be a newsmaker, take on an impossible project, and be successful at it. You'll get attention. We've got one restaurant owner in town who just tells everybody, I don't advertise because I make the news. Well, I hate that, but we cover him all the time. So
The other thing would be advertising. If you can't get people interested in covering the story, there's a way to get the information out.
As a private citizen, is it more constructive for us to support a local newspaper that has escalating costs and plummeting quality and coverage, or is it more constructive for us to not support this local effort?
I think it'd be more helpful to buy the paper from Gannett, the whole operation, and then decide that it's going to be something important to the community.
No, that's an excellent question, and there's really no good answer. Like I said, anything you buy in business, you want it to be high quality and have value, and you feel like you're investing your money into it, that you're getting something out of it, and that becomes increasingly more difficult in some places. I think by default, support, do what you can. I like the idea of supporting reporters on a personal basis. Maybe if you can no longer hack the everyday subscription to the State Journal Register, at least stay tuned in, maybe buy a digital subscription for $4 a month, and, stay engaged with the reporters there about, what you like, what you don't like, and, ideally those thoughts will trickle down and show up in the newspaper.
if you stop subscribing for a while, you can get it at a cheaper price the next time you start.
I would add to that, just support the people who are doing the most journalism in town, and that will help them at least be solid enough to continue to report. And Bud's organization is one of those that continues to get really good reporting out. One of the areas that's the hardest is we want to cover the top line stories, first of all, and we can't even do enough of that. And then you get in-depth stories and accountability stories and things. We had one story Rachel Otwell worked on for almost a year with ProPublica, and it ended up being one or two stories out of it. That's a lot of investment to do an investigative piece.
On this side?
Could you address, we've all had good auto mechanics and bad auto mechanics, good electricians and bad electricians. So could you address journalism? I remember as a young girl growing up in Chicago, I would run to the newspaper box to get my newspaper. And, somebody just said, as the stories get, dumbed down or whatever, of course, growing up in Chicago, I feel like I had the best of the best journalism, and now I'm in Springfield and it's a lot different. And I feel sometimes somebody who just graduated from high school is doing, so would you address as far as good and bad and how that has affected everything?
Jason, you want to start off with educating the reporters to start with? Young's not necessarily bad,
All
right?
my graduates, whatever newsroom they end up with, will be good reporters. We see it out in the field as well with reporters. You're in a big group with the politician or whoever, and you'll see which reporters ask certain questions that are more intelligent than other certain questions, or maybe not intelligent's a fair word, but just more informed. You know, they did some reading about the topic before they came to the news conference that day. And, you know, that's a function of their education, a function of their experience. And, you know, when we come to markets like Springfield or Peoria or smaller, we're going to get a lot of new, fresh reporters. Again, I'll say, you know, be patient with them. I think they're, you know, a good thing about young reporters is, in many cases, they're hungry, they're extra curious. The things that we see every day in Springfield that are ridiculous, but we just gloss over them because we see it every day. Oh, Springfield. A new person will come in and say, what is this all about? And they'll want to do a story about it. So there's value in that, and I think we can work with everything else to, you know, get them to read and be prepared and ask good questions, and, you know, not be afraid to dig into controversial topics or challenge people or keep officials accountable. Those skills all come with time. You know, like I said, my own students, you know, they're getting that experience now working at the State House. So hopefully in whatever newsrooms they end up in, they'll be a little bit more ahead of the game than a typical bachelor's degree recipient. But yeah, those skills come with time.
Good journalism is still good business. It seems like it wouldn't work to make people mad and expose difficult problems, but a lot of our advertisers, they support us because we sell their products, but also because they believe in what we're doing. And I think that gathering an audience over time with good journalism is what makes the whole thing work.
Yeah, getting it right and being inclusive in all the points of view you include in stories, regardless of age, really is what makes a good journalist, I think. So, good stories.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. I can tell by the number of people we have in the audience, and I know the more questions were available, that this is something we are interested in. So we want to stay close to it. I hope you'll consider the Citizens Club as one of those entities that can provide deeper knowledge about things in our community. Want to let you know about our next program, June 23rd. We're still working on some logistics, so we don't have the exact topic. However, mark your calendars for July 28th, when we will have newly elected Mayor Misty Buscher join us, reflecting on her first 84 days, as well as talking about her goals for our community. And as I finish, I want to remind us all to remember and thank those men and women who have served our country as we enjoy Memorial Day weekend. With that, thank you and have a good day. Thank you.